Hey guys, welcome to another episode of ATF, and today we are pleased to be joined by a man who's very well known on South African TV and South African footballing circles. It's none other than Mr. Zaid Omar. Zaid, welcome to the show. It's an absolute pleasure to have you on.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
Fantastic. Well, just before we get stuck in, for those watching, please do remember to not forget to subscribe to us on YouTube at All Things Football. And Zaid, just to get started, we just like to know where it all actually started for you. Can you perhaps tell us a bit about your upbringing and where your love for sport and football in particular developed?
My passion for sport obviously started as a young boy growing up in Salt River. I've always been passionate about sport. I think it first started at primary school athletics. I had a bit of pace and was a sprinter, and naturally the sports head at school, at primary school level, thought I'd be a good footballer. And from there, my passion for football just grew and grew, and it hasn't stopped. And it's become a bit of a monster in my life, but I'm glad that it's actually been something that I've been able to pursue as a career, both in what I do.
Yeah, I see you posting quite a bit on Twitter about athletics, and someone like myself who also took a keen interest in athletics in high school. Was there ever a toss-up between you getting into athletics or football at a stage in your life?
No, I think I knew early on in my high school career, or late on in my high school career, that I wasn't going to be one of the top Western Province sprinters. And I think my affinity towards football was greater than that towards athletics. So I enjoyed athletics. School sports was great back in that days. I don't think school sports have ever been equaled these days. It was a fantastic experience, experiencing school sports in the 80s. But of course, my passion for football has always been there. And I think I was a bit more talented at football than I was at athletics. So that my lean towards soccer.
Zaid, I wanted to ask you, you're currently the president of FC Kapstadt. Tell us how you became involved in that club and how it came about, basically.
So obviously, growing up in the apartheid era, there weren't as much or as many professional football opportunities. I played for a local club in Salt River, and we played under the SACOS banner, which of course had a slogan of no normal sport in an abnormal society. There was no international football at that time. We didn't have access to the English Premier League on national television like you have now. The best opportunity to follow English Premier League was in a shoot magazine, and then of course once a year the FA Cup final would be broadcasted on SABC, and that was the highlight of your life as a young kid growing up in Cape Town. And incidentally, Tottenham Hotspur was quite often in the FA Cup final. How my affinity to supporting Tottenham Hotspur came about. I think in 1982, 1983, 1984, I think Tottenham Hotspur was in 3 or 4 FA Cup finals. Garth Crooks, Glenn Hoddle, Chris Waddle, Clive Allen, those are the players that they were just, any cup final would attract any youngsters. So that's how I came to support Tottenham. There was no family member that kind of influenced me. It was just pure passion and affinity. So growing up in Salt River, there was no real professional football. The Federation Professional League was the professional league in Cape Town. We didn't follow the white leagues. It was against the principles of my family, and of course being brought up in a household which was very progressive and politically aware. We didn't look at white football. We didn't look at anything but the Federation Professional League and what happens under the SACOS banner. So Santos was obviously huge back then. Santos, Batswood, Claywood, those were the clubs that we looked up to. And of course, the players like Duncan Crowey and many others were heroes. We didn't look at football happening at Hartleyville, Hellenic playing there, or whoever was playing there. That was white sport. You drive by, you don't even look at Hartleyville Stadium. That is how politically aware my upbringing was. And so in 1991, the year I was matric. That was after unification. I went for my first so-called competitive youth trial. Cape Town Spurs had advertised for an under-19 trial team called, there was a new league, under-19 league being launched called the Celtic Skulls League, which was a phenomenal concept. The first ever national youth league under the new era, or the unified era. I then went to try at Cape Town Spurs and successfully made Cape Town Spurs' under-19 side, and it was the biggest achievement ever for me as a footballer. I was over the moon. It was insane. Yes. And so I made it. I didn't think I was going to make it. I took a chance. I went to Parow Park. There was about 5, 6, 7 sessions of trials. The late Petty Dolly, who's an icon in South African football, through Cape Town Spurs, was the selector. He selected me. And the announcement was made in the Cape Argus and the Cape Towns, and that again was something fantastic. Overnight, my name was in the newspaper, and everybody saw my name there, and all my mates in the area told me, congrats, and it was huge. And the fascinating and the beautiful thing about the Celtic Skulls under-19 league back then, which was the first youth national league, was that you get to play curtain raisers to the main, what you now call the Premier Soccer League matches. So the NSL matches, if Santos was playing against Kaizer Chiefs, the curtain raiser would be an under-19 Celtic Skulls match against another club at Athlone Stadium or at Old Greenpoint Stadium or wherever the venue is. So that was something you've never done ever before. To run on Athlone Stadium or Greenpoint Stadium or a stadium was something huge. I mean, that was phenomenal. So a lot of things happened in the space of that time. Obviously, it was my matric year. My dad was on my case. I needed to travel from Santeville, where we lived, to Parow Park to go and train there. You needed to attend madrasa. Before you could do that, you needed to be before Maghrib. So the window period of traveling and getting to be on training on time and finish on time to meet the demands of my family, the religious demands and all of that was quite difficult. Anyway, I enjoyed my first year at Cape Town Spurs. Cape Town Spurs won the Celtic Skulls League in its first year. I didn't get to play the whole season as a regular for a number of reasons, education and a number of other stuff, as I mentioned, Islamic studies. But I was part of the squad and I was a proud member of the squad. That was my final year as a 19-year-old. So the following year, I couldn't play as an under-19 player. SAFA then launched what was called the Toyota Under-21 League, which was the second national youth league since unification in 1990 or 1991. I then decided I needed to move from Cape Town Spurs because they were training in Parow. It was too far from where I live. My dad said, there's no way you're going to be able to make training after you finish your madrasa class and then having to travel by train or bus or whatever to Parow. So try and find a club close by. So the club's closest by was FN Rangers, which was based at Malta Park. Back then it was actually Rangers St. Agnes, who was also playing in the Toyota Under-21 League. And the other club was Santos, which was training at Hartleyville, incidentally, exactly where FC Kapstadt is based now, since you're asking. Yeah. And I trialed at Santos, made the Toyota Under-21 team under the late Joey Lawrence, and of course the living legend in Bernard Dancing Shoes Hudson, who was the head coach back then. And that was, the early years of my competitive youth football life. Thereafter, I went and played NSL Second Division, which is now the equivalent of National First Division football. I never ended up making it in the NSL First Division or the Premier Soccer League, which is now. But the highest I played was the equivalent of the National First Division. There was no National First Division. It was a regional league. But proudly, I played in there. And from there, I decided after matric, I would like to pursue sport as a career. My dad said, it's a stupid decision. You're not going to make money out of having a sports degree. And if I think back now, he had a lot of wisdom. He wasn't an educated man, but I think he had the right thought in mind. If you were going to go for wealth, or if you're going to try and make a life for yourself, in sport in South Africa is not the opportunities aren't that great. But I was passionate about sport. I felt that I wanted to do something that I'm passionate about. It wasn't about wealth or anything else. It was all about my passion. I then went and studied sports science at UWC against the wishes of my dad. Also did some media studies. And from there, my passion for sport, along with my education and my on-field experience, along with coaching badges I did at UWC through SAFA. I did my level 1, 2, and 3 back then. I took all of that together and I forged myself a media career. Started writing, started doing radio work, started doing television work, and it evolved my life where, you know, I've got now close to 30 years in television, radio, and in media. So I've been privileged. I've been lucky. I've really had some phenomenal experiences. But I think what I'm doing on a day-to-day in my life is something that I've been passionate about since a kid. So as those things evolved, I always felt that I always had a desire to try and provide Cape Town and South African football with a football platform that is different, that is unique, that is clean, that has a culture of a number of facets which I identified through my life experience, both as a player, both as a scholar in sport at university, both just traveling the world and seeing and not seeing it in Cape Town or in South Africa. So I started FC Kapstadt in 2002, along with a few friends that was playing competitive football. I acquired a Vodacom second division franchise, which is now the equivalent of an ABC Motsepe League franchise. But even before I bought the franchise, I had already mapped out a plan based on what I had learned through my studies and through experiences on how I think a club should be run. And one of the main targets or main directions I took was one of my assignments in my final year at university, in which I used to how to run a football club, how to run a sports organization. And I used that blueprint to try and put it into practice. It wasn't perfect. Don't forget the practicality of it when you put it into practice proved that it wasn't the perfect, blueprint. But I then ventured out to find myself a sponsor before I bought the club, found a sponsor for the club. So in the ABC Motsepe League or in the Vodacom Second Division League, I think what we achieved in the first year when I started the club was something never equaled in South African football. It was the first Vodacom Second Division club, or now known as ABC Motsepe League club, that managed to attract a corporate, an international corporate as a sponsor. So my marketing plan was rock solid. It really was good. I mean, if I look at it now, 20 years later, it still is something that I'm quite proud of. And it still works. So what I had done was I got New Balance, the apparel brand, the international apparel brand, to come on board. And they then said to me, we will come on board as your naming rights sponsor. So FC Kapstadt was then known as New Balance FC Kapstadt. In essence, short, New Balance FC. So we campaigned or started playing in the Vodacom Second Division in 2000. I established the club in 2002. We started playing our first appearance in the Vodacom Second Division in 2004. So that's after acquiring the franchise. But between 2002 and 2004, I first got the sponsorship and first got ourselves a home base. I struggled with that, approached the city of Cape Town, and they then gave us access to the old Greenpoint Stadium on a book and play basis. So I gave them all our first round home fixtures and all our training times and dates, and I booked it, and we were based at the Greenpoint Stadium. So this was phenomenal for me. I was over the moon. Never before has a club ever had an international corporate brand as a sponsor, both in terms of apparel and in terms of financial incentive. And never before in South African football has a second division club or a Vodacom second division club or ABC Motsepe League team being based at the stadium and train there. And we had a little storeroom and an office, and our players come to training and they're in the change room. It was phenomenal. It's absolutely professional, how you would see professionalism back then. The flaw in my problem, or the flaw in my project at the time, was that we had no youth. We only had a reserve side, and we had the first side, who was the first team in the Vodacom second division. We always believed that we were going to evolve towards that in the next second and third and fourth year. So that is how FC Kapstadt came about in 2002. That's how the establishment of FC Kapstadt came. We then also have got the City of Cape Town with, as I said, the facility. We got New Balance in as the apparel sponsor, as the naming rights sponsor. We got Red Bull involved. I got Nando's involved. So that was huge in South African football in terms of sponsorship and marketing. That was huge. I mean, when you came to a home match of New Balance FC at the time, the stadium would be branded. Our team would be kitted out. We had a decent budget through sponsorship, so I was able to sign quite a few decent players. We appointed Johnny Ferreira as the head coach, and in our first season, we contended for the league title to get promotion into the National First Division. We lost out. Clyde Pinans won the league, and they went to the playoffs and actually didn't make it at the playoffs. And that's how FC Kapstadt, or New Balance FC at the time, was established.
Well, Zaid, I love how you took us down a little history lesson. I mean, in the early 90s, myself and Wasim would have still been running around in our diapers, but it's nice to get a semblance of history and perspective on the early times in your career. And, you know, some of the achievements you actually fulfilled as a player is, you know, nothing short of remarkable. Yeah. And you actually touched on my next question with your explanation in terms of what motivated you to purchase a football club. And I just want to find out, aside from, you know, the sponsorship that you acquired and what you had to do to acquire a home ground and so on, are there any other sort of intricacies regarding the purchase of the club, like certain things you had to abide by according to, you know, maybe the NFD or the PSL regulations or anything along those lines?
So in order for you at that time, if you acquired a ABC or Vodacom second division franchise back then, you needed to have a home ground. You needed to register. You have a registered home ground. You needed a letter to say that this is your ground, whether the City of Cape Town that owns the land, or if you own the land yourself. You needed to have some proof of documentation to state that this is your ground, there's floodlights, and you have this as your home ground to play your league fixtures. It changed. I think these days it's a bit more lenient, but back then you needed to have a home ground with floodlights. So that was one requirement. The other requirement which you had to have back then, and it's still a law now, is that you needed to be affiliated to a local football association. We weren't affiliated to a local football association. So we didn't have amateur football teams affiliated to the club with juniors and amateur senior side. We didn't have that. So what I did was, after studying that process, I knew, gosh, we don't have the resources and the time to set that up in a short space of time. It already took 2 years to get the facility, to get sponsorship, blah, 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 before we acquired. So we managed to study the SAFA constitution and the LFA rules and regulations, and we were then allowed to affiliate through guest affiliations to the LFA. So that kind of met that affiliation criteria in order for us to then play in the Vodacom second division. A lot of clubs complained, saying that, yeah, that's not a full affiliation and you don't have youth and you're not actually playing at LFA level. But it didn't matter. I remember at the time some clubs were even protesting, but it came to nothing because SAFA accepted it and they issued us fixtures and we were allowed to play. But these were also mind games. You know, this is in my first few weeks of starting off a so-called semi-professional or professional club. There's so many things thrown at you which you don't learn at university level or in a degree, that is part of your school fees or your education in actually running a football club. So we'd start our first game, and in the very first fixture, the game hasn't even started, and a club owner or club chairman throws a letter at you. We're protesting through the return. You're not affiliated correctly, so you're taken aback. Gosh, what was the first thing? Okay, then you continue with the match, and then within your first week of running a club, you're already sitting in the boardroom in a DC hearing, having to defend what the processes are. So from that first fixture right up until today, every single day of running a football club has been an education of note, nothing equal to any university degree or nothing that I've experienced in my media career, traveling to some of the biggest or best clubs in the world, whether I'm standing along the side of a Bafana training session or Kaizer Chiefs training session as a journalist. It's an education of note. And I think that experience and that education has actually even evolved me to be a better sports or presenter or journalist, in order of understanding the runnings of football properly, not just technical stuff in terms of on-field stuff, but behind the scenes, the laws, the regulations, the constitution, the actual running of a football club. I think it's an education second to none.
So it's fascinating hearing you explain the intricacies of the football clubs. But I want to focus on Cape football in general. As a fan, as someone who knows the football landscape in South Africa quite well, tell us what are your views on Cape Town football? Because we've got currently 2 PSL teams, we've got about 4 Grad Africa Championship teams. So tell us, in your view, how strong is Cape Town football at the moment?
I think Cape Town football has always been very strong, and Cape Town football remains to be very strong. When I grew up, or in the early days after unification, or if I use a classic example, or the most successful example of South African football, which is when South Africa or Bafana won the Africa Cup of Nations in 1996, you can just, by that squad, the entire South African squad, the Bafana squad, determine how many players of Cape Town were in that squad. And I saw on one of your programs the other day, you had Andre Arendse. Andre Arendse I grew up with Andre Arendse in Salt River. That's 1. You had Mark Williams is number 2. You had Sean Bartlett number 3. And I can go on and on and on and on. So a good portion or percentage of the Bafana squad, the most successful Bafana squad in the history of South African football, had quite a few Cape Townian players in it. Now, if you take a step back, not just national team level, the Western Province or the Western Cape dominated national or provincials at national level for many, many years, whether it's under 12, under 14, under 16, under 18, you always hear Western provinces winning the titles. So much so that the other provinces started really getting jealous, And if you look at, and if you take a period of 10 or 15 years after unification and you look at the top teams in South African football, the teams that won the leagues, you'll always find 1 or 2 Cape Townians in it. Do you know what I'm saying? If you look at Sundowns, there's 2 or 3 Cape Townians in there. If you look at Chiefs and Pirates, there's always 2 or 3 Cape Townians somewhere in the mix, being one of the top performers, whether it's National First Division or whether it's Premier Soccer League. There's always a Cape Townian that is performing. And if you even look at our most successful South African footballers, Cape Townians went to Europe in the English Premier League and made us proud. More Cape Townians. I think maybe I'm being biased. I think I probably am. Maybe watching too much of Cape Town, but I think Cape Town football has always been strong, and Cape Town football remains to be strong. If you look at the performances of recent Cape Town Premier Soccer League clubs or National First Division clubs, I think they weakened as a result of our best Cape Townian players moving on to the biggest clubs in South African football. That's maybe one thing. But I don't think that's the problem in terms of why Cape Town professional sides are not progressing or doing well in South African professional leagues. There are a number of variables, there are a number of factors which is leading to us not actually performing. I think this year is a year like no other before. We've never had a pandemic. We've never had a professional league having to play 2 league fixtures every single week. It's something new for a coach, for a sports scientist, for a football chairman, for a football administrator to plan. Recovery isn't there. It's not the same. So I think the inconsistencies in all the clubs is shown in the English Premier League, National First Division, Premier Soccer League, all over the world. It's shown that there's no consistency with any one team. Sundowns is consistent, yeah, I would say that. Manchester City is consistent, but they started off quite inconsistent and now hitting their straps, probably finding the way. Pep is probably finding the way of how to deal and juggle during the pandemic, playing 2 games at a time. But it's very difficult not having fans in the stadium. Having to be in a bubble, it's very, very difficult. I don't think there's a coach that has ever worked under these conditions. So I cannot comment on sort of a level where a professional club is playing in a pandemic. It's absolutely difficult. It's very difficult. Coming back to your question in asking what is the standard of Cape Town football, I think it's still very strong. It's very high. Why are Cape Town professional clubs not performing well in the professional leagues? That, as I mentioned earlier, there are a number of reasons, number of variables involved in them. I think one of the reasons, a lot of people say the development or youth development is not done correctly in Cape Town or in South Africa. I say there is no correct way. If you look at one of the most successful footballers in South African football, whether it is Benny McCarthy, Sean Bartlett, Mark Williams or Shoes Mashuayo or Andre Aronson, they didn't come through youth academies or youth development programs. They were developed raw, natural,
Yes.
and they reached the highest level of South African football. So do you need an academy or a high-performance youth system to develop players? No. You need a mix of an academy and you need a mix of natural development and club football to develop youth in the right conditions with the right type of coaches, with the right mentality. There's so many variables. I see it on a day-to-day basis. And what we try and do at FC Kapstadt is not to go the extreme level of being an academy or a professional club. We don't want to be an amateur club. We're not a professional club. We've got to try and strike a balance to try and find natural development, because there are so many variables in youth development. I'll give you an example. There is stats out there in Europe and in the world which states that you have to train a certain amount of hours per week, per month, in order to become a professional footballer. For example, if we go to school, from primary school to high school, we spend so many hours per day at school in order to learn, to get our education. It's almost the equivalent of that. When you want to become a professional footballer, you have to spend that amount of hours. How is it possible for you to tell a child you're not going to go to school anymore? You have to put that amount of hours in football. And if you bring the two together, it's impossible for a youngster to actually balance the two. I mean, you can't train 3 hours or 4 hours a day and be schooling and eat and sleep and have a social. It's impossible. It's very difficult. So you have to strike a balance. And I'm never going to say education is not important. I'm always going to say education must be your primary focus and goal for any young player. So you have to strike a balance and find a recipe that is suitable for every kid, every player. Very difficult again, but that works and makes them thrive. And I think some players have the desire. They come out of the toughest neighborhoods in the world and they make it to have the desire. That's an important factor for me, number one, along with some natural talent. And then, of course, with the guidance of a good coach and a good club with good facilities. I think those things, those variables, if you mix them up well and a lot of luck, I think you have the recipe for good youth development. I won't say that we don't have that in Cape Town football. I don't say that. But what I do say is there's so much emphasis on professional clubs and academies wanting to do it the right way that we're actually losing focus of just naturally developing and finding the next Sean Bartlett or finding the next Andre Aronson, the next Duncan Crowe. Duncan Crowe was not even coached, I'm sure, at youth level. It was all raw, but right moment, right time. It's the sun at the right time. It's the rain at the right time. You know, that mixture, that recipe, it's and a lot of luck, you know. I believe, I feel if I look at myself as an aspiring professional footballer, there were a lot of variables. I think I should have made it. But in my era, some of the biggest football stars in South African football were at the same age as me. So if I look back, they made it in Europe. So I look back, I say, you know what? I was amongst the best. So maybe today I would have maybe have made it, maybe not. There's many things, but again, it's got to do with your time is your time, your luck is your luck, your opportunity is a day. It's part of what's yours. It's your moment. It's what the world gives you.
So you touched on a point that I know Wasim and I agree on, where we've always felt, like you said, the best Bafana teams put up the best performances when they had a good core of Cape Town-based players. And certainly myself and him feel that perhaps the national team are punching below their weight, and we can do a lot better in terms of our players also, you know, getting into Europe and so forth. What is your opinion on that? I mean, do you think that ideally we are performing at the level that we should be performing at in terms of the national team and our players in Europe?
I think the national team can do better, without a doubt. I think a contributing factor to the performance of the South African national football team is how many players we can get to play at the highest level in world football, because national football is on an international scale. You're competing against the best of the world. So in order for our players to have experience against the best of the world, they need to play club football against the best in the world, in Europe, or in the biggest leagues in the world. Now, if you look at 1996, another variable that comes into play is that the criteria for a South African player to be able to qualify to play in Europe was a lot less complicated.
Yeah. Yes.
The requirements for a young player or for a good 22-year-old or 20-year-old to play in Europe is so difficult. It's almost impossible these days based on your work permit requirements. So it's very, very difficult. Back then it was easier. So that 1996 squad, not many of them at the time played in Europe, but after winning the AFCON went on to play. And then, of course, led to the success of the national team after 96 up until 2002, qualifying for the World Cup in 98, 2002, and so on. But in order for Bafana to perform better on an international scale, I think we need more Percy Taus or more players play in Europe. And that's the problem at the moment. The other problem we have also is that the smaller leagues in Europe, Belgium, Denmark, Sweden, and I can be, correct me if I'm wrong, I think the Premier Soccer League clubs are paying even better than those clubs. So the players are more comfortable staying in South Africa, taking this in with their family and taking the salary here, as opposed to traveling far, cold, not eating, having the food, the sun, blah, blah, and their family, as opposed to going. So they stay here because of the income. And can you blame them? I mean, you got to make a living. That's your career. Or do you take the chance and go? And sometimes a lot of these players don't actually cut it there, you know. So you risk quite a lot. So it's a difficult question. But my short answer would be we need more players to compete on a European level. If we can't get that, we need more clubs to go and compete in competitions. One-off competition, friendly matches. Our youth players needs to go and play in tournaments and competitions there. Or they need to come here. We need the Europeans to come here. So that is something SAFA should look at. And that's something that I'm addressing on a different level. But it's very difficult for clubs to go into Europe. It's very expensive. But we should get Europe to come here. Why are we making such a big fuss of Europe? You know, Europe, it's easy for Europe to come here. We should, and I hope with the new CAF president, Patrice Motsepe, being elected and also being a FIFA vice president, that he will, one of his ideas, I hope, would be to get the world to come to Africa more often in order for the world to develop Africa as opposed to Africa developing the world. Because if you look at the best players in the world, it's Africans. Paul Pogba is an African in my mind. Drogba was an African. And so some of the biggest stars are Africans in world football, Brazilian African. But the Europeans are not coming to Africa. I'm not saying they should come play. I'm saying teams, Manchester United should come play here more often. We should have it. It should become almost policy to level the playing fields. But the Europeans are always going to dictate matters because of the financial power they have.
Zaid, I remember a time where you were involved with Ishi Bobo and you managed to interview, I think it was Michael Owen at the stage. I thought I'd ask maybe which players have you managed to interview and you know, were such a big deal in terms of international stars, you know, that you were able to interview?
I've been fortunate and I've been blessed to have interviewed some of the biggest sports stars in the world of sport. If I think back, I'm still, you know, the hair raises on Pele was one, Sachin Tendulkar, Michael Jordan. No, sorry, Michael Johnson, not Michael Jordan, not Michael Johnson.
The athlete.
Yeah, 200 meter before Wade van der Kerk. He actually came to Cape Town and he was racing in an absolute at the Greenpoint Stadium, and I had an exclusive interview with him, as well as Marion Jones, who of course tested positive later on. But those were the first two big interviews in 1998. It was massive. I was like a kid. I was shell-shocked. I mean, I couldn't even pose my questions correctly. But yeah, those were the first ones. Pele, Samuel Eto'o, Sachin Tendulkar, Shane Warne. I mean, the Cricket World Cup was in South Africa when I was just in my early years of being a journalist, managed to interview Sachin. In terms of world football, Beckham, I was the first South African journalist to have interviewed David Beckham in Durban when Bafana played England. It was set up. David Beckham actually broke. It was after the match. He broke his arm, his wrist, and I had 5 minutes with him, and it was a bit awkward because he was quite in a bit of pain. So the interview was cut down to 2 minutes, and he had these braids, this funny voice. Yeah, I remember that. For all of 3 minutes. In 2003 it was, when Bafana played England in Durban. And that very same weekend, I managed to interview Michael Owen, and had exclusive interviews with Alan Shearer, all for my show, which was Ishi Bobo.
Wow.
And at the time, Ishi Bobo was the most watched football program on national television. It had record ARs, audience ratings. I remember Robert Marawa saying to me, "You're kicking my butt," because he was doing MTN Soccer Zone. But there was no social media. And Ishi Bobo was positioned. I had structured the show such that it was aired on a Saturday at 12:30 before the English Premier League fixtures would start, or just before the Premier Soccer League would start. So ETV had no broadcast rights for Premier Soccer League or English Premier League matches. So I had to be creative in getting behind the scenes stuff, exclusive interviews, magazine stuff, which people don't get. And that was what set the show aside. But my passion for it, I always wanted to show the behind the scenes stuff, what happens in the change rooms, exclusive interviews, talking to footballers about the early years, what makes them tick, how it all started. Tell me about the coaching on the field when you have training. And that set me apart. And I managed to find a niche and a recipe to get content that was unique for a period from 2003 right up until 2007, which I ran Ishi Bobo as the presenter and executive producer of the show. It was phenomenal times, memorable times. We'll never forget it. People keep asking me, when are you going to do it again? And that is something that I'm definitely going to do in the future. It's probably breaking news right now.
Fantastic, exclusive.
So yeah, there were many big football stars that I interviewed. I in 2002, ETV had exclusive broadcast rights for the FIFA World Cup in South Korea and Japan. In 2006, I went to Germany to cover the World Cup in Germany. Of course, the World Cup after that was in South Africa. In between that, I was doing Champions League, presenting the Champions League on ETV. And there were plenty of opportunities to interview big stars in football and in all sports codes. The list is too long, but I've been blessed. I've been fortunate. In some instances, I've met some of my dream, footballers.
You also mentioned that you are a big Spurs fan, and I think you recently went to go view the new stadium. What did you, tell us about that experience, and then also what do you make of Mourinho at Spurs currently, because they were recently eliminated from the Europa League, and that's obviously been you wanting to win a cup is definitely something high on the list. So what do you make of Mourinho and his time at Spurs currently?
Look, Jose Mourinho is definitely undoubtedly one of the most successful managers in Europe. I've been following his career and have been a sort of a fan of his since he came from Porto to Chelsea. What he did at Inter Milan and Porto was phenomenal. What he did at Real Madrid was phenomenal. What he did at Chelsea was phenomenal. He won trophies at Manchester United, whether you like it or not. His time was successful. Not all Man United fans would say that, but he won trophies. Obviously, as Spurs supporters, we'd like to see Tottenham win a trophy. That trophy drought has to end. And I think he's probably the one coach that can deliver. We'll have to wait and see. We're in the Carabao Cup final. There's limited opportunities, but I do think the fact that we're in a cup final is a step closer. I mean, Mauricio Pochettino took us to the Champions League final. There's no trophy. No matter what Spurs do, we're always going to be based on when we have our next trophy. So I think Mauricio, it's been an inconsistent season since he started, but it's not easy to do what he's done. I hope and strongly hope that we will get our hands on a trophy. Last year, this time, I went on a journey to Europe to do some work for my football club, to do some research, do some media work, and I was never going to pass by an opportunity to visit the new Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. It is the best stadium in Europe at the moment. It is phenomenal. The state-of-the-art technology and features to the stadium. I mean, come on, you have a NFL pitch rolling out and a state-of-the-art grass pitch rolling on. You've got heated seats in the place. The suites are on another level.
Absolutely, and I think with we watch a lot of YouTube videos. We watch videos where fans actually go to stadiums and so forth. And I mean, I was blown away by the dressing room in the new Spurs Stadium. It's phenomenal. It certainly puts Old Trafford to shame at the moment. I mean, we have leaking roofs. Our tunnel resembles, I don't know what it resembles, but yeah, it doesn't compare to.
One problem I have with United, how can they not fix that tunnel?
Absolutely.
Every time a match, look at the tunnel, I'm like, what the hell?
Absolutely. Also,
But no,
just
the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium is something else. It is insanely beautiful. The technology throughout the stadium is insane. They've thought of everything: recycled water, electricity. It's just insane. It's phenomenal. I was lucky enough to be given a proper tour, not the fans tour. I gave an in-depth, thorough tour behind the scenes. It's insane. It's on another level. But I mean, come on, it's £5 billion, so it has to be one of the stadiums in the world. I mean, Cape Town Stadium is £4 billion. That's £5 billion. So it is special.
Ridiculous, crazy money. Just as a Spurs fan as well, Zaid, I mean, Spurs started on an absolute high. You thrashed us at Old Trafford. For a couple of weeks, it was talk about Spurs being a contender for the league. Now you kind of, yeah, absolutely. And I mean, things were looking up at that point. Like you rightfully said, there's been inconsistencies during the course of the season. Do you see Spurs finishing in the top four?
Well, it starts this weekend when hopefully we beat what seems Newcastle.
Easy. That'll be easy. You'll definitely beat that.
I think we have an outside chance. Realistically, if I think with my head, I don't think we will make it. My heart, I'd like to believe we can make it. But again, with this pandemic season, anything is possible. There's just so much inconsistency, especially with that bottom. I think if you look at the top two, I don't think Manchester City or Manchester United will be surpassed, but definitely from third and fourth place down to eighth, anything is possible there. They're just not consistent. Chelsea is not consistent. They have a run. They're having a run now, an impressive run. West Ham is inconsistent. Arsenal's inconsistent. Leicester is looking good. So anything is possible. But every team is kind of hitting a bad patch and in a bit of form. Tottenham had it. Hopefully we can maintain this patch now and get ourselves in the top four. I think we deserve to be there with our stadium.
We're also entering, talking about your stadium, I mean, it's a stadium that's befitting the Champions League, and that's where my next question is directed at. We're also entering the latter stage of the Champions League, and certainly City are chomping at the bit, so are PSG. You can never, discount Real Madrid. They're looking tough to beat at the moment. How do you see the Champions League playing out? And if I had to put you on the spot, who are you pinpointing as a possible Champions League winner this season?
So outside of the English Premier League, I'm a massive Real Madrid supporter since a young child as well. So I just got that on record as well.
We're anti-Madrid.
I've managed to spend 5 days at Valdebebas, Real Madrid City, at their training ground. Carlos Queiroz was their head coach. I had built up a relationship with him when he was Bafana coach, and I spent time there as a journalist filming their training and doing interviews. And that was at the time of the Galacticos. Luis Figo, Ronaldo, Roberto Carlos, David Beckham, proper. So that was, again, another kid in a toy store experience for me.
Yes.
Another chapter of my education of note. And for me, Real Madrid is always going to have an opportunity as the most successful Champions League club. I think they're always going to have an opportunity to be one of the clubs that will or could win the Champions League this season. Manchester City is obviously pushing hard to win it as well. I think that's what Sheikh Mansour wants, and I think that's a massive mandate from him to Pep Guardiola. Manchester City is looking in sublime form. They're playing fantastic football. PSG, I think, under Pochettino hasn't really hit their straps. Borussia Dortmund, I don't think they have what it takes to go all the way. I don't think they have that. Bayern Munich, of course, after their success over the past few years, the Germans always has a great competition Champions League pedigree. But anything is possible again with this pandemic. It's just difficult. The amount of fixtures and demands on players' physique to perform 2-3 times a week every week is difficult. And speaking from a sports science background, that is tough. I I coach on a daily basis. I see the demands on players and what it requires to be able to perform at that high level. To perform at the highest level in world football 3 times a week it's no easy task. It's tough. It's really tough mentally, physically, emotionally. It's really tough, and people don't realize, for example, a player like Messi or Ronaldo to be able to compete on that level consistently for so many years. That's it's crazy. Yeah.
So to answer the question, you came with Real Madrid.
Yeah, I'm with Real Madrid, Galacticos, Real Madrid for the Champions League. They don't look as if they have the necessary form, but they know how to win the Champions League, and Zinedine Zidane clearly does.
Yeah, absolutely.
I have to agree with you.
It's tournament football, so it's not league. It's tournament football. If you're on the day, you get it right. You get through the one match, the next match, and the next match, and there you are in the final.
Yeah,
exactly. Zaid, moving on to Sunday, we've got just 2 more questions from my side. Moving on to Sunday, we've got a big game for Bafana. We're playing Sudan away. We need a draw at least to qualify for the AFCON tournament. What do you make of that game? Do you think we should see it through?
We should be able to beat Sudan, but we always tend to find ourselves for the past 10 years or so situation where we have to win or draw or pick up a certain amount of points.
Taking it to the last game.
And when it gets to that, you're almost telling yourself, or you're almost failing already. Ghana was always going to be a tough one. If we had beaten Ghana last night, I would have felt a bit more confident. But Sudan, again, anything is possible with Sudan. The African nations are improving all the time. If you look at the Sudanese team, there's quite a few of their players that is also now playing high-level football in Europe. That doesn't necessarily mean they'll beat us. My heart tells me I'd like Bafana to qualify. My mind tells me it's going to be tough. It's going to be tough. Difficult one to call. We should, on paper, and as South Africa, as an African power, we should beat Sudan. But every time we come up against a minnow, this powerhouse of Africa, South Africa or Bafana, just isn't able to deliver. If you look at the amount of shots on goal in last night's match, disappointed me. Possession, shot on goal, chances, clear-cut chances. That concerns me. If we had drawn last night and we had 10 clear-cut goal scoring, I would be more upbeat and more positive about it. But we're just not creating enough chances, and that's my concern. And going up in a crunch match like this, anything is possible, but your last game is always what you can, determine or gauge your performance on.
Finally, from me, Zaid, what are you currently busy with, and where can the guys catch you on the socials?
So you can catch on my social media account on both Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, Zaid Omar, capital Z, capital O, but there's no other Zaid Omar, I think, in South Africa. So at the moment, due to the pandemic, a lot of sports media or sports events have come to a standstill. The only sport happening at the moment is the English Premier League and some international football and some international rugby and cricket. But essentially, there's not much sports reporting to happen. My tenure after 10 years at Good Hope FM has come to an end at the start of the pandemic as a result of the pandemic and SABC cutting down. That's public knowledge. Everybody sees it as a result of pandemic and SABC's financial woes. ETV doesn't have much football happening on their channel at the moment, as well as sport happening. The same with SuperSport. So in terms of media work, there's not much happening. I'm freelancing in terms of media at the moment. And of course, what's keeping me busy most of the time at the moment is FC Kapstadt. We're back on the field after a long lockdown. I've made an announcement late last month that our big grassroots football event hopefully goes ahead this year. In 2019, at the beginning of last year, I announced as part of my travels last year that I was bringing Liverpool's under 12 and under 14s to South Africa for the Lucky Star Cup, which is the event which FC Kapstadt owns and hosts. So that project is keeping me busy. The planning and running of that event takes 12 months to get off the ground. I'm busy with that. I'm still writing media articles and doing media coverage in my own space, in my own special, unique way. through my social media platforms. There's a lot of stuff that I'm busy with that I'm not announcing. For example, a possible turn of Ishibobo kind of show. So there's always stuff in the background I'm busy with, researching unique stuff, media stuff, television stuff, radio stuff that hopefully will come off and again be exciting to feed South African fans. But the big thing I'm involved with obviously now is running my club and making sure that we get something that South African football hasn't experienced before, like bringing Manchester United's under 12s, 14s and 16s and Liverpool, Real Madrid, Barcelona, getting them to come to South African football, playing in Cape Town. It's very difficult. In order for our youth to develop on another level, we need our youth to play week in, week out against youth teams from those clubs. And we can't travel there. It's very expensive. It's very difficult. So we need to have as many tournaments where we get them to come here and participate and play against our kids. And that's making a dream come true. When I was a 14-year-old, I'm sure when you were a 14-year-old, we'd love to have played against the Manchester United 14-year-old. That's a dream come true. So for me, that is a platform. The event is a platform to make dreams a reality. It's a platform to inspire youth. It's a platform that makes dreams a reality. I just keep repeating that. And that for me is so self-rewarding. And I think if I am trying to make a difference in South African football, I think through my club and through the event, through media work, I think that's my journey and my challenge.
Well, we've come to the end of the interview that basically wraps it up for us. Just before we do, give our thanks to Zaid again for those watching. If you haven't subscribed to us on YouTube, please be sure to do so for more content. Zaid, thank you so much for availing yourself and for offering us your time. We know that you guys, often have busy schedules. I know that you mentioned you're freelancing, but you're always busy in the background, as you've mentioned. So we truly appreciate your time. And we certainly enjoyed, listening to your stories and getting, certain history lessons from you from, back in the day, very early in the 90s. So thank you so much. It's highly, highly appreciated.
I appreciate the opportunity. You guys are doing good work and keep it up. I always see the education in media work and what content is out there. It's always an opportunity to either inspire or to educate young players or just about anyone. And talking football, everyone's passionate about it. So there's never enough conversations and chats about the interview. So thank you very much for having me.